I'm now joined by Dr. Mmatlou Kalaba from the Bureau for Food and Agricultural Policy. I appreciate your time, sir. Now, from your analysis, what aspects of John Steenhuisen's background and experience do you believe are most relevant to his role as Minister of Agriculture? Now, in that clip from the Transvaal Agriculture Association, we heard Benny van Zyl saying they were looking for a minister or a head of that ministry who was familiar with agriculture and obviously various economic policies.
Yes, good evening. I mean, like most ministers, I don't think their background and their experience in a particular field is something that gets considered when they get appointed, except in one or two, ministries like health and treasury or economics. However, their guidance in this case, given that we are in a new era of coalitions or multi-party government, they would be guided by a number of policies, either theirs combined with the majority. But looking at the situation, they are more likely to go with what has been currently happening. But if you ask specifically about John Steenhuisen being the leader of the Democratic Alliance, we are aware that over time they have been premising their manifestos or their policies on what has been happening in the Western Cape, how they governed the Western Cape over a period of time as an example of what can be done if they were elected. So if anything, apart from the current policies, chances are they will lean more towards the style of the DA governance in the Western Cape, but not necessarily from a personal background or a personal perspective, which is something that can develop over time, depending on how long he is in this ministry.
Now, food security is obviously something that is absolutely critical. We've had, in fact, we've had droughts across South Africa, across the SADC region that will impact food security. Is John Steenhuisen the right person to walk us through this period?
Once again, I think any person given the right support, and I think earlier on the point was made about the institutional capacity, the culture that exists in these ministries, would be the determining factor rather than the individual. Of course, the individual has to have a posture that is more affirmative, that is more inclusive, and that basically emphasizes on the key issues. You mentioned the issue of food security. It's quite interesting that, in South Africa, food security, even in the worst of times, is hardly a function of not having enough food. It's not a function of not producing sufficiently for every citizen in this country. However, it is as the outcome of affordability. It is the outcome of distribution. It is the outcome of infrastructure making food to be expensive in certain areas relative to others. And those are the issues that not only the Minister of Agriculture will have to deal with, but multiple ministries responsible for agriculture, responsible for transportation, would have to collectively address such matters. So again, I would go to the point that the guidance and the delivery is certainly beyond an individual. But of course, it gets complex in a multi-party government where the ideologies and the views would, from the starting point, be different. And someone mentioned the point that they need to be mature enough to understand that they need each other and therefore find the middle ground for every difficult situation.
Dr. Mmatlou, how might the separation of the Ministry of Agriculture from the Ministry of Land Reform and Rural Development impact policy implementation and certainly governance in South Africa?
Oh, that's going to be a big one. First of all, the two ministries, looking at the respective heads, is that they come from different parties with, one can almost argue, different or extreme ideologies. You have the DA, which, when it comes to issues of land or property, they believe in property rights. And now you have the head of the land reform and rural development coming from the PAC, which its ideology is around, community ownership, about the land not necessarily following those rights. And we know that agriculture relies heavily, is the single most economic sector that relies on land for its production than any other. So they need each other, even though they are sitting at different, ends of the same pole. They'll have to find each other. I mean, another point is that the part where I believe that the Minister of Agriculture, the newly appointed Minister of Agriculture, would have to, butt heads with either his colleagues in the ministry or in the department, as well as other colleagues in cabinet, is around the issue of, developing farmers, where even in the last 30 years, in each and every value chain that you look into, in each of every commodity group, except one or two, the contribution of Black farmers is less than, 10% in most of those. Basically meaning that progression to bring up Black farmers, even though they are in majority in terms of numbers, has not gotten to the level where they are able to contribute towards their commercial counterparts. And that is the part where they are going to have challenges. Now, some people directly link that with the issue of land transfer, land ownership, land access. And to a certain degree, that plays a role. And that is where the butting of heads between different ministers, given the stance and the policies of the DA on agri-BE in particular, versus the others at land affairs and in the ministry. But that will be an interesting one to watch over time, how that develops in order to create a space for Black farmers to really upgrade, develop, and start to improve their contribution in terms of food security, in terms of agricultural production, and the contribution to the economy at large.
Does this offer an opportunity for John Steenhuisen and certainly the majority of white commercial farmers in this country to engage with Black commercial farmers, obviously to boost their own capabilities?
You can see it that way, and that has always been the posture. There are a number of programs over the 3 decades that were premised on what you just mentioned, that the mentorship program, the experienced farmers, they take developing and the new farmers under their wing with the support of government. It has been the position, and it continues to be so. However, not everyone has taken that on board. Not everyone has really progressed sufficiently to improve on these numbers that I was mentioning. But like you said, a different head might have a different approach, might have a different, say, reception from both sides of, the 2 groups of farmers. And that is something that we will look with interest and see how it develops. Of course, that's what we want. For transformation, for development to happen, we need both coming together, but the previously disadvantaged starting to emerge even at a much faster rate than it has been the case in the last 30 years.
Well, John Steenhuisen, as leader of the DA, has urged all those in the Government of National Unity and the executive to work towards the greater good of all of South Africa. In fact, he said, and as did DA Federal Chairperson Helen Ziller this morning, say that their purpose is to serve all South Africans when they're in positions of leadership. So will you be lobbying amongst your colleagues as a Bureau for Food and Agricultural Policy to ensure that these policies, which are already in place but have not been implemented, are actually implemented?
Lobbying is a strong word. You go right there. We don't do the lobbying here.
Encouraging or nudging.
Point, exactly. Yes. Our institution for the last 20 years, that has been our purpose, our role. In other words, to support decision making in the sector, to enable the sector to thrive by providing research that is based on evidence, but also that leads to policies that would certainly lead to a competitive sector that helps everyone to move forward. And we have worked previously with every minister, with all heads of departments, not only in government, but of various commodity association or institution within the agricultural sector at provincial level. So that is actually the key responsibility that we have as an organization to serve the agricultural sector in South Africa.
Dr. Kalaba, appreciate your time. That was Dr. Mmatlou Kalaba from the Bureau of Food and Agricultural Policy.